Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
What do we really know about UFOs? What is exopolitics all about? Do UFO hunters ever run into ghosts?
Welcome to the 459th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Dr. Bill Birnes, and I'm sitting in for Ben Eno this evening.
Well, Bill, it's always great to have you back with us. Ben is still slogging through his summer course in Boston, but he will be back with us in probably about 2 weeks. Meanwhile, we're doing an open line show on the UFO subject this evening, and who better to have with me than our good friend Dr. William J. Birnes, Renaissance man, publisher of UFO magazine. Bill is a prolific author, speaker, and producer in several different subject areas. He's well known from international television and radio, and especially from the blockbuster documentaries he has produced and appeared in, particularly the UFO Hunters series on the History Channel. And Bill has been a true friend to this show as well. He's gotten us out of a few jams over the years. He's also the author of the new bestseller, Dr. Feelgood, the true story of Dr. Max Jacobson and how he changed history by manipulating President John Kennedy, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis, and other key figures of the 20th century. Long title for a great book. So let's get right to our listener emails. Okay, let's start with Bill. I don't know if you know Larry Lowe from Phoenix. He's a well-known journalist in that area and a UFO researcher. And he sent in actually two questions in that I'd like to start with this evening. We have far more than we'll ever get to, but let's get going. Larry is wondering about the citizens' hearings on UFO disclosure. These took place, I believe, in April. And I don't know if you were there, but several of our friends were. Were they a help or a hindrance? Larry would like to know.
Where insofar, Larry's question is great, and I do know who Larry Lowe is. Larry's question is great because it goes to kind of the essence of disclosing information about UFO events and the paranormal, and whether just disclosure within the UFO community does anything. And that's kind of where UFO Magazine sits and UFO Hunter sits and things like that. In terms of the citizens' hearing, this was, with one major difference, very much like the same kind of hearing that was held in 2007, same venue, National Press Club, where pilots and all kinds of aeronautical individuals, experts, testified before the world's press. It wasn't really a testimony. They were speaking before the world's press about their firsthand, unique experiences encountering UFOs. And of course, there wasn't a lot of press there. James Fox filmed it. We filmed it for UFO Hunters, and it kind of bubbled up and then faded away. This citizens' hearing, the difference was that there were a number of former congressional representatives, so officials, and the premise of the hearing was this, and this was a good idea that Steve Bassett had, considering the fact that Congress rarely has taken up the UFO issue. It did majorly with Professor James McDonald when he testified before Congress, and of course Stan has spoken about the subject, Stan Friedman, before Congress. But this was a situation where if you could bring retired former congressional representatives and Senator Mike Gravel and others together as if it were a legislative hearing, the legislative committee hearing, and then have witnesses testify as they would at a hearing, would that sway the congressional representatives into thinking maybe we should study the subject more? So the bar wasn't really all that high. It's not as though the congressional representatives, it's not as though there was cross-examination, where skeptics and debunkers showed up and tried to cross-examine the witnesses at a hearing. This was a case where the witnesses spoke for themselves, maybe in some cases talked about video they've seen, first-hand encounters, and then based on that testimony, the question was, what would the congressional representatives do. And some of them said, absolutely, I think there is something here, probably unconventional, can't tell you what it is, but were I still in Congress, I would definitely call for an investigation of this field. Mm-hmm. That's on the one hand. And others said, well, I'm not really persuaded that something unconventional exists, but it's really something where I'd like to see the evidence, more evidence to convince me.
Okay.
So,
were you there?
No, I was not there. It was in Washington, D.C., and I wasn't there. But this issue of UFO Magazine, and by the way, this issue of UFO Magazine is digital, and it's available free to anyone who wants to read about the citizens' hearing, because one of our writers, Kevin Randall, was there. He testified, and he wrote the article on the citizens' hearing for UFO Magazine. It's free. Go to ufomag.com, that website, download it for any device you have, and it's all yours for free, including the article on the citizens' hearing.
Excellent. Well, Gary Hesseltine was on, and he was telling us about the hearings. He was there. Gary Hesseltine, for those who don't know, is a British police official who has probably the largest database of police UFO sightings probably in the world, although it's mainly British police. But he was saying much as you did, Bill, that it was a very impressive situation for the members of Congress who were there. I believe there were 5 members, I may be wrong, maybe 4 or 5 members of Congress who usually don't receive this information in any concrete form. And he said they were very impressed with what they heard from the speakers there. So I guess perhaps in answer to Larry's question, it was more of a help than a hindrance.
Well, it was more of a help than a hindrance, but it was a help in a very limited sphere of, if you needed to say, if the UFO community managed to get its act together and make evidentiary-based representations before a congressional committee, what might the reactions be? Well, you get an inkling of what those reactions might have been from the people who were assembled. But remember, they were paid to be there.
Exactly. They received.
They were paid about $20,000.
$20,000, right?
There.
Yeah.
So you're not looking at something completely independent. You're looking at people who were paid to be there and paid to be part of this particular event. My theory is this: that it is probably likely, to answer again Larry Lowe's question, it is probably likely that the people who need to know about the subject in Congress already know about the subject in Congress. There is an embargo on it. There is a taboo on it. And they will simply not talk about it, nor will Congress take this seriously. They did I would say in the 70s and 80s, when they did have testimony before Congress. And obviously, when Gerald Ford, the representative from the Hilldale area of Michigan, in 1966, after the Hilldale sighting, he called on Mendel Rivers, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, to open up an investigation into UFOs. That was promptly shut down by the folks at Blue Book, by the head of Blue Book, and Jerry Ford backed off, and as you remember, he was the subject of 2 assassination attempts after he became president.
Yeah. That's true. Let me pause right here, just to. Ben is always chiding me for forgetting to give our phone number, and it's locally 401-766-1240, and nationally or in Canada 800-449-1240 if you'd like to talk to Bill today or me. And I'm also going to mention that it's awfully strange out there in the sky, and I'm wondering, keep your eye on the skies, watch the skies, but in this case it's for the weather. So if anything happens, it has happened at the station before. We have lost power, and I'm not going to anticipate that, but if it does, just bear with us. And I think our producer has some sort of something up his sleeve in case that happens. Anyway, let's continue. This is a second question from Larry, Bill. And he's in reference to John Kelly trying to connect the recent whistleblower, Ed Snowden. Ed Snowden, if anybody watches the news, should know that this is the NSA whistleblower. So I've been all over the news for the past few weeks talking about the U.S. government surveillance programs. And John Kelly, whom I do not know, is trying to connect the recent whistleblower, Ed Snowden's work to PRISM, which is the project for the surveillance, to UFO false flag preparations. What say you to that, Bill?
Here's my large take on this entire Snowden NSA disclosure. Okay, this is my take. Call me crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
If you were, and this is to Larry Lowe. Just think about this, Larry. If you were the president of the United States and you really wanted and you had a Congress that, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, I don't care. You had a Congress that was adamantly opposed to anything you did, even if you were proposing Congress's own ideas. Okay, let's just start with that premise, because this is fact, it's not my opinion so far.
Okay.
And you were president, and you wanted to open up a big dialogue, force Congress to confront a program that you voted against and ran against when you were running for Senate and then for the presidency, and you ran against, you don't like it, you don't believe in it, you don't want it to continue, you feel that it was unconstitutional at its outset, it's called ab initio, unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional now, you absolutely don't like it. How would you bring that before the public? Well, my thought is this: find some useful idiot who is fulminating against this program. Make it easy for him to get whatever material you want, including lots and lots of disinformation, go public. Because why would Snowden, here's my question, why would Snowden go to Greenwald at The Guardian and go to, I forget the other guy at the Washington Post, but why go to them? I mean, if he's NSA and he's busy setting up this with various news reporters, wouldn't it be likely that somebody at the NSA who's tracking every piece of information would want to know why one of their own contractors is going out to a reporter to talk to a reporter? I mean, wouldn't that strike you? So why not let this guy disclose? Go to Hong Kong, have a nice day, disclose whatever you want to disclose. That puts this subject right in front of the American people. Now we have to have a discussion about it. We have to deal with it in Congress, even if Congress wanted to sweep it under the rug. For me, I see this entire operation as false flag from the beginning, and it's a brilliant way to find a way to deep six things like NSA spying on American people domestically.
Interesting. Well, we have a caller. We have Bob from Cumberland, Rhode Island, who has a question.
Yeah, good afternoon, gentlemen, Paul. And
good evening.
I just this has been on my mind for a long time. It's not related to what we were just talking about, but the Phoenix Lights. Paul, you were in a unique position to be flying over Phoenix during that supposed sighting.
Yeah, that was a shockaroo for me.
And I know there was two different types of sightings there, but Bill and Paul, I'm referring to the so-called mile-wide UFO.
The 830 sighting?
Yeah. The one that people said, I saw one woman interviewed said she could lift a newspaper over her head and it still wouldn't cover how big it was.
That's right. That's exactly right.
But my quick question is, gentlemen, what are the chances that that was a hologram?
Very good. In my opinion, if Paul saw it, that's a whole separate line of a response. For me, I think that the person that I spoke to and whose credibility I trusted the most was Governor Fife Symington, former governor of Symington of Arizona. Mm-hmm. And he said flat out that it was a palpable object. He believed it was palpable because when you looked through it, the stars seemed wavy as if some film were passing over the stars.
That's
and
exactly
said it was a clear night. So he thinks that it really was a craft and not a hologram.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What I saw were separate. I was in a plane. I saw separate lights doing different things. One appeared to land, and of course we're whipping by, at 33,000 feet, and it's very difficult to tell the height of an object from an airplane, with your eyeballing it. And it was something quite. It seemed three separate objects, but it did match the description. And I spent 12 years in the military. I know what a flare looks like, and it's not what this was. I will point out one thing, though, and Bill, I don't know if I've ever told you this. Lynn Kitai, who was a local investigator in Phoenix, an author, a wonderful person, we've had her on the show a number of times, she sent me a number of videos in preparation for one of her appearances, and among these videos was what was very clearly a small plane with a triangular lights affixed beneath it, flying over, and I said, what is this about? Was this a hoax? And there was some reference by Lynn who was a very credible person, Dr. Lynn Kitab, a medical doctor, and she said that this was Well, apparently someone was experimenting or something like this, but I really was not satisfied with the answer. I mean, Bill, have you heard of anything like this?
Yes, I have.
Okay, what's the story with that?
Okay, in the Hudson Valley sightings, basically about a dozen years before the Phoenix Lights, and the Hudson Valley sightings, after people, and this is the upper Hudson Valley, Cornwall, places like that, right? Okay.
Yeah.
After a number of witnesses had seen these lights, a group of retired pilots, but they were private pilots now, and they began flying in formation over the Hudson Valley, and they said that I forget the name of the group, but they said that the Hudson Valley sightings were really their planes flying over. It was a big joke, but the problem was that people who saw their planes flying over, and people who saw the Hudson Valley lights, and people who heard their planes flying over and didn't hear the Hudson Valley lights said it was clear that was called the Stormville Flyers. It was clear that the Stormville Flyers were trying to hoax it, and for some reason. And I talked to somebody from the CIA about how this stuff happens. Is it just like in somebody's mind it pops up? And he says, no, what happens is something like this. You have more CIA cutouts and listening posts and cooperating folks in the United States domestically than you could possibly imagine. And they have a lot of contacts, just like any police force has its own informants. Mm-hmm. And what they do is if somebody's in a bar bad-mouthing the whole UFO incident and says, I can show that's a big fake, somebody will sidle up to that person at the bar and say, hey, you want to get paid to do this? I'll finance you. I think it's a fake, too. The person wouldn't know he was being set up by an intelligence entity, whether military or civilian. Just he's getting some money to do it. This is your opportunity to prove you're right.
Sure.
And that's how that kind of thing works, and it's happened on a few occasions.
Well, also, Bob brings up an interesting point. Our caller just brought up an interesting point with the hologram thing. Now, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, although I'm starting to wonder some of the stuff we get. I know that you're an expert on that kind of thing, Bill. What is your opinion of this opinion that many of these things are holograms, or that the government or someone is preparing to generate holograms to make people think there's a UFO invasion in order to strengthen the grip of our masters in Washington, or whatever however you want to put it?
Right. I don't think the latter is the case at all. I mean, if the government really wanted to do some kind of a martial law thing, sorry, Alex Jones, if the government really wanted to do some kind of martial law thing and really exert its power, they could. I mean, when you realize what they have done, right? They were putting American-born Germans in concentration camps up near Wisconsin during World War II. They were imprisoning Japanese Americans in concentration camps. In fact, the German POWs we took during World War II, put them in New Mexico, had more freedom than native-born American citizens relocated to concentration camps. Mm-hmm. The government has the facilities, has the means, and can certainly do forced relocation. With all the disasters we've had, from Hurricane Katrina, from, Hurricane Sandy, all these things, the government has had more than ample opportunity to experiment with an arm like FEMA coming in and doing damage. They haven't. Not under conservative presidents, not under moderate or progressive presidents. It hasn't happened, and it won't happen because there's no interest. First of all, you don't need the government to do that because American citizens are more than willing to give up all their personal information. Think of life right now as the movie The Truman Show, and I mean that seriously.
Wow, yeah.
With Facebook, with Twitter, with LinkedIn, with the web, with all the social media, and with iPhones generating your GPS location every 30 seconds, you can be pinpointed by satellite wherever you are, unless you actually drop off the grid. The only person who successfully dropped off the grid and was able to elude the FBI was the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, and we all know how he did that. He did it by dropping off the grid, living in a wooden shack in Montana, and riding his bike to the post office to deliver his bombs. When he went public with his manifesto, that's when he was caught. My point is, you don't need UFOs to create kind of a prison state. But as the holographs and neutral buoyancy aircraft, we've been experimenting with those for 10 to 15 years. And it is, if you have a solid object on which, and smoke would be that kind of a particle object on which to project a holographic image, you could do that. So theoretically, if you have a huge neutral buoyancy craft, like a balloon, triangular shaped balloon floating across, no gas propulsion, and you wanted to demonstrate the ability of that craft to fly away at hypersonic speeds, just project that hologram, and then the craft itself can go black, and folks won't know that the craft is still there. It's the hologram that moved away.
No,
we have that technology.
Well, that makes sense to me. We're going to get ready to take our break here, and we're going to be you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, although this evening, Paul Eno and Bill Birnes on WOON 1240 AM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with more questions from listeners. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Greg Bell, the host of When Radio Was.
I'm Mortimer. Bill. Is that you under that blindfold?
Bill, with this thing on, I can't see who I am.
No, I'm not. Can't you see anything at all under that blindfold?
On a clear day, I can see the blindfold.
You can?
Yeah.
When Radio Was, shows from the past for today's imaginations.
When Radio Was airs Monday through Friday, right here on ON 1240 Radio at 11 a.m. and 11 p.m.
Okay, I'd like to tell you about two charities Ben and I have adopted, of the several we have adopted, and one is USA Cares. USA Cares provides financial and advocacy assistance to post-9/11 active-duty U.S. military personnel, veterans and their families, and they assist all branches of the service, all ranks and components, and they really do a lot of good on a basic level. In other words, if a veteran has trouble paying his or her mortgage, out goes a check from USA Cares. They raise money, they do all kinds of great things, and we do suggest that you check them out, usacares.org, and they are trying to look at starting a chapter here in Rhode Island, and we're going to suggest that you can contact me directly on that, Paul at BehindTheParanormal.com or 401-527-5345. If you're interested, it's relatively simple, and we could do a great job for them, I think, here in Rhode Island. Also, for our Canadian listeners, Canadian Veterans Advocacy founded by the veteran Bill Blaze, and you can check that out at CanadianVeteransAdvocacy.org. Do a lot of great things. They do a lot of legislative advocacy in Ottawa for the veterans of Canada, are certainly our good cousins and allies throughout all the troubles of the war on terror. So please check that out as well. Okay, let's return to the show now, and our co-host Bill Birnes, and we're answering questions from listeners. And here's one, Bill, from Frank R. in San Bernardino, California. And Frank writes, "Hi, guys. I can't wait to hear my three favorite paranormal guys on the air together. Paul and Ben, you always end your shows with thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and I really love that. I agree that's what the paranormal is all about. What I wanted to ask you and Bill Birnes is this. Wasn't there supposed to be a traveling exhibit of alien bodies approved by the government? This was to be called Cosmic Journey. Do you or Bill have any information on whether that was true or what happened to it?"
Well, my understanding is that in the opening moments of Roswell, according to an affidavit that was sworn out by Walter Hout, who's the public information officer at the Roswell Army Airfield, the 509th, that initially in those first hours, General Ramey showed up at the base and said, look, since the first crash, 75 miles or whatever north of Roswell, since Chavez County public safety officials, the fire department, the sheriff, already rolled on that crash, thinking it was there was an airplane crash, saw the alien body, saw this, saw that, let's cop to it. Let's say yes. But the other crash, it was another one, two UFOs might have collided 40 miles away. That one nobody knows about. Let's keep that secret. And that was kind of a double cross, because when Major Marcel arrived at Fort Worth, not Fort Hood, Fort Worth, it was Roger Ramey who pulled the switcheroo on the debris, and Marcel had to say, oh, gee, I guess I made a big mistake. It's really a weather.
Yeah, we had his son on the air last week.
Right. So the point that I'm trying to get to is that they never really believed, even from the outset, that they wanted to put alien bodies on display. This was a major, this was so secret, as the Canadian Wilbert Smith had said when he spoke to Robert Oppenheimer, that Oppenheimer, who was part of the Manhattan Project, said that the secrecy involving the incident at Roswell and the technology that they discovered at Roswell, that secrecy was greater than the secrecy of the Manhattan Project. So I tend to go along with that early comment. So no, I don't see that as an exhibition of alien bodies going across the country.
Well, it's funny that Frank writes this question, this particular period in our show's history, because I'm currently on a hunt for the fellow. He lives in Florida, and he was the development director for that project, which was, interestingly enough, supposedly a project that was between, I guess, sanctioned by the government, but organized by, I can't remember quite the name of the company offhand, but it was they essentially had produced circus material before this. And there is a rumor that I've heard the Cosmic Journey was really supposed to be just animatronics and things of this kind, and it was killed in 1989. So I don't know. We're going to try and do a show on that and see what the story was. But I know it is very little known. Stan Friedman hadn't heard of it, what he told me.
It's something that in UFO lore is so easy to get tangled up with other events that, if it was a circus project, if it really was kind of like, if there were aliens, what might they look like? That's one thing. Or it could be a massive government. The government likes to have fun, but they just don't want to spend money on hoaxes. So that's why I'm very kind of skeptical about the government weighing in and spending sums of money on trying to create a false story to divert information from UFOs. They did that in the late 1940s and early 50s by going to the entertainment industry. This is what the CIA did. And giving them stories about alien landings and alien clashes. And the point was to turn what was real, what they believed was real, into fiction. And so by fictionalizing it, you can hide it right there in plain sight. And then when people would see it, they'd say, oh, you're just a Hollywood nut like the people seeing Earth versus the flying saucers.
That's just what I learned in the military. That's what you do. That's exactly what you do. You don't try and keep secrets because you can't. You send out misinformation. Right. Well, anyway, here's another question, Bill. This is from Kenny G. in Cumberland, Rhode Island. Everybody in Cumberland's excited tonight. Hi, Paul and Ben. Your show makes me sick. Well, it makes my week. Well, that's good. It's such a relief from the usual reality show, bovine fecal matter. I love Bill's shows too, and I like to know the real story about why UFO Hunters was canceled in 2010. It was the best show on UFOs I ever saw. There are all kinds of stories, like you guys got too close to Area 51, or found out too much about human hybrids. What's the real story?
Well, both of those are actually true.
Really?
I think one of the bigger issues was there are a bunch of issues that all coalesced around the same time. First of all, the budgets were very high for the show, and History Channel didn't want to spend that much money on a show, although we had some major sponsors, Apple and IBM and Porsche and Mercedes, and sponsors that I got.
Yeah, that didn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Right, okay, so that's one. But the other thing was this, that History Channel was starting a new channel called H2. And what they had lined up, the success of a show like Ice Road Truckers, which was really about the interactions between the people, set up the American Porn Stars, American Pickers, Swamp People, all those shows. Mm-hmm. What they discovered about that channel was that people loved to see shows that really attracted the trailer park market. They loved it.
Yeah, that's well put. Yes, exactly.
I'm thinking ratings were very high, right.
Well, I'm thinking of the pilot we made, Ben and I made with the New York producer who will remain nameless, but they went to the networks and we were essentially told we didn't argue enough and we were too intelligent. So
right, what they want is they want this organic fighting, which is why in the third season of UFO Hunters, Ted Ackworth, Dr. Ted, they had a baby. So his travel ability was severely restricted because they had a baby. He was starting a new business. Ted's wife worked full time at a bank. I mean, there was just no time left. So Ted couldn't travel with the team the way the network wanted him to. Mm-hmm. So as a result, they changed the angle of the show, getting away from science into supposedly, with Kevin Cook, who's a really nice guy, that he was the engineer and the skeptic, and he really did have an engineering degree from Penn State. He was the engineer and the skeptic. I was supposed to be the nutcase, and Pat was supposed to be the guy that gets out there and goes digging and builds bridges and stuff. Well, there were three problems with this. That Pat had done his own interviews. Kevin really was a believer in UFOs, not a skeptic, and he was playing one on TV, and he didn't like it, and he just felt very conflicted by it. And of course, I wasn't a nutcase, and we had some real stuff, like the Dulcie episode, where Kevin had to take a skeptical stance, but you're staring at a photograph of a cow's body with a human head. Tough to take a skeptical shot unless you say, oh, the whole thing was Photoshopped, but you're Photoshopping something from before Photoshop was invented. So that was one of the problems. So it was, the real thing was, not only did history want to move all the UFO and paranormal stuff over to H2, right, and keep the main stuff, but the budgets were high, and the other thing was, yes, we did step on some phenomenally big toes at Area 51.
Yeah.
This one CIA guy that intercepted us along the way in the third season said, your show's going to be canceled, you got a lot of people mad at you, you stepped on some really big toes, you don't climb Tickaboo Peak with a 300 millimeter, a huge telephoto lens, and film something and then match that up with what you find on Google Earth, and then put 24-hour surveillance cameras around the base and actually capture a UFO over the base. That was the last thing you'll ever, that was the end of your second season. The people at Area 51, the guards, the Delta Force guards and the private contractors, were falling on the floor laughing. Their bosses were steaming with fury.
Wow. Well, that's the story there. Sometime I'll tell you what happened to me down there. Anyway, here's another question. This is from Steffi in Manchester, UK. Can Bill tell us what was the weirdest UFO case he ever ran into? He's just got several questions here. I'll just take them one at a time.
Well, the weirdest case for me was in the UK, and it is because it's a case. Here's my criteria for the weirdest case. So it's not just throwing a name out. It is when a number of events that should be disparate events become tied together under the rubric of a UFO encounter, and the government takes that rubric so seriously it then takes all the events that surrounded that UFO encounter and wraps them into a national security act, penalizes the person that was the experiencer of that event, and then puts the whole thing under national security. This happened in England, and for me the case is the Alan Godfrey case. It would take all night to go through it, but essentially it's the story of a police officer, and Gary Hazeltine knows the case because he talked about this case. It's the case of a police officer, a constable, who was called to investigate the discovery of a dead body lying on top of a coal heap in the town of Todmorden. It was a coal mine.
Oh, the Adamski thing, yeah.
The Adamski thing, right. And everything, I mean, if Lieutenant Colombo were there, he would have found everything wrong about that case, okay? I'm not going into the details, but it was like a case where everything about it was wrong. The guy had heart failure, but how did he get to a 25-foot coal heap on top of the coal heap with a bad ticker? Okay, the guy's ticker was so bad it was a weak heart. So that's first of all. Mm-hmm. He couldn't. Then how did he wind up on his back on top of the coal heap with no coal on him? You know, there was no coal on the guy, right?
Yeah.
No coal under his fingernails. Now, yes, it had rained the night before, but under his fingernails. The guy had been undressed and redressed, and he had holes in the back of his head with an ointment that the medical examiner in the UK could not identify. It was unknown. So there were burns where there was some kind of a headpiece put on his head. Mm-hmm. Why all that? Okay, then this gets even worse. Then the cop investigated it, Alan Godfrey, disputed the coroner's findings at the inquest. He was told to shut up. It was the official comment was the guy died of natural causes of heart failure, even though nobody could explain how the guy could get up to a coal heap in the rain and leave no footprints around the coal heap, and there was no coal dust on the bottom of his shoes. How do you climb up a coal heap and have no coal dust, right?
Difficult.
So there's that case of basically a 187 discovery of a dead body.
Wow.
So a short time later, Godfrey is called out. There were missing cows from a pasture. Goes to the pasture. Sure enough, the cows are missing. Where are the cows? No footprints. Where'd they go? How did cows disappear without footprints? Right? Driving down the road, sees this huge triangular-shaped object hovering just a couple of feet off the ground, and it had been raining, as it always rains in Britain. It had been raining, and where the object was spinning, it was creating like a vortex. There were leaves. It was in November. There were leaves being strewn around in a spiral, but underneath the UFO, it was dry. Okay, so Godfrey doesn't have a camera, so he whips out his clipboard to try and take notes, write a report, do some sketches. There's a blinding flash. He's blinded. Next thing he knows, he's on the other side of where the object was. It's not there anymore, but the leaves are still in a spiral shape. The road is still dry. He can't account for the time. Drives back, gets another constable. They drive up. The constable witnesses the phenomenon of rain, but no rain there. It's dry. And the leaves. Goes back. Then he finds out that there were UFO sightings reported all across the area. Then they find the cows in another pasture. Nobody knows how they got there because there are no footprints. And they couldn't have crossed the road because there's nobody saw on the road. It was like they were levitated, lifted up, and thrown into another pasture. Well, he can't figure out what it is. The basic UFO groups in the UK decide to investigate the case, and they're pressing on him to do regression therapy to see what happened during that missing time. He does, and he's taken aboard a spacecraft, and they're doing all kinds of experiments on the guy, and they deposit him back in his police car. The police department gets so mad at him that they basically say no more regression therapy, no more this, no more that. It's a dead case. They get him to sign a National Securities Act letter, right? Mm-hmm. Acknowledging that he's under the control of the National Securities Act, but in the letter is the Adamski case, right? The Zygmunt Adamski case, as well as the UFO sighting, as well as the cattle stuff. And here's the weird thing, okay? Bookending this particular... that's weird enough, right?
Yes.
Here's the bookend of that. Long before he's called out on the Zygmunt Adamski case, the discovery, he is setting up to arrest some guys who had a warrant on them. He sees them at a local pub. He calls for backup and says, okay, you guys, I'm arresting you. There's a warrant out for you. The guys beat him up, and they kick him in the testicles, and they just pummel him. And he's told as a result, he's invalided for a while, and he's told you will not be able to have children ever. Okay? Now flash forward well after the UFO incident. Okay? He's in bed, and he hears a hum at night. He can't figure out what's wrong with him. Then in the night, he feels activity in places where he hadn't felt activity before, and he and his wife enjoy that activity, and they have a kid. What happened on board that UFO? Now, he says the doctors told him, oh, you just healed yourself. But I've got a really funny feeling that whatever happened on board that UFO had a lot to do with why a guy who could not have had kids because he was injured now can have kids after everything that intervened between being beaten up by the suspects and having a child.
Wow, well,
that's the strangest case.
Okay, well, that answers that. Also, now Steffi continues, how did he, meaning you, Bill, get started in UFO research?
Well, folks know it's on the internet that I did this piece for History Channel where I had a UFO sighting all the way back in the 1950s. And you tuck it away and you get excited about it and you know something's up. But it really wasn't until I was representing a book for a television series to a production company in Los Angeles, and they were the ones that had secured Lieutenant Colonel retired Philip Corso's motion picture and literary rights for a story about American POWs left behind in Vietnam. Corso was an expert on that because of his role in negotiating Operation Little Switch, Big Switch at the end of the Korean War under the Eisenhower administration. So we're at this. So I was editing this book for that movie company, trying to put all these stories together to put together a book which would then be a rights magnet for a theatrical or a television motion picture. That was the deal, right? Then Corso drops the 2 bombs. One was about the Kennedy assassination, in which he said he investigated the Warren Commission. Too long a story to tell, but it wound up in my book, Dr. Feelgood. And the other story was that when he was at the Pentagon, he saw the Roswell crash debris that was taken to the Pentagon by the Army. Well, this was in 1995, and Corso had just made the headlines because he was testifying before the Robert Dornan MIA committee, and he had talked about the fact that POWs were left behind in Korea to be used as playbacks, their identities back to be playbacks, and the KGB had already turned over their files to Yale University, the Venona files. So what Corso was saying, and had been laughed at back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, he was laughed at that, now turned out to be true, and they actually found the presidential finding that Eisenhower had signed, acknowledging American service personnel were being kept in China and the Soviet Union and North Korea as prisoners, and there was a note on it with Corso's name on it. So suddenly Corso became the whistleblower of prominence for these people. And when he dropped the bomb, so he's now in the news. Then when he dropped the bomb about Roswell, we went to Simon & Schuster that had published, I think, 4 of my earlier books. And S&S said, you've got the 50th anniversary of Roswell coming up in 1997, and if you can have this book out by then, it's a deal. The book was published on the day of the Roswell anniversary.
I think I got it the day after, yeah.
Yeah, that was the day after Roswell.
Yeah.
And then what happened was, after that, the folks who owned UFO Magazine said, look, we're in over our heads here. Can you get the motion picture company to invest in the magazine? So I brokered a deal between the motion picture company and them, at their request, for them to buy into the magazine. They took it over. They ran the magazine for like 8 or so years, maybe 6 years. It was a no-go. So they said to me, we're closing it down. And I said, you can't close it down. You've got a whole community out there of people who really liked it. Oh, well, we're closing it down. So they said, if you give me $1, I'll give it to you. So I gave them $1, and I got the magazine. Once I had it, and I had started an ebook company, and once I was able to put the two together for a list of kind of ebooks on UFOs and paranormal stuff, once I did that, a production company from the History Channel came up, this was in 2004, and said, do you know about the Russian Roswell, Kapustin Yar? And I said, yeah, I do. We ran stories about it, and we actually published a book with Phil Mantle and about it, and they said, great. They came down to where we were living in California. We were in Los Angeles back then, and we did 2004, and I did a piece for them on the Russian Roswell and Kapustin Yar.
I remember that.
It turned out the ratings for that UFO Files were very, very high. I did about 4 or 5 more for them. And then Pat Uskert, who was writing for UFO Magazine, and my wife came up with this idea, the two of them, about doing a road show for UFOs called UFO Road Trip. So we took it to one production company, and they said, nah, we don't want to get involved with UFOs. And so I took it back to the production company that did UFO Files. My wife wrote up, Pat filmed, and I basically narrated a demo for them. And History Channel bought it, and that was how I got involved in UFO Hunters and the magazine.
Well, that's really cool. Bill, before we burn up, this has been the fastest hour I've run into lately. Before we burn it up completely, would you tell us about your new book, Dr. Field? That title's the scariest thing I've heard tonight.
Well, Dr. Feelgood was a real person. In fact, anybody who watched the Mad Men episode, Mad Men on AMC a few weeks ago, knows they had a character playing a doctor giving methamphetamine injections to all the people at Sterling Cooper Price. So, and that was Dr. Feelgood. In fact, they even called him Dr. Feelgood. I think it took it from our book, actually. But the story is this, that the book is about a German immigrant doctor who invented what is now modern methamphetamine injections, and one of his top patients was President John F. Kennedy, whom he overdosed. Kennedy was sick. He actually had a fatal disease, Addison's disease. Mm-hmm. He overdosed Kennedy. to the point at the Vienna Summit Conference with Khrushchev that Kennedy was almost incomprehensible and he acted like he was drunk. That encouraged Khrushchev to make a move on Cuba, which he did. It turned out to be a big embarrassment for the Soviet Union that didn't have the missiles that could reach the United States from Asia, and they had to move the missiles out of Cuba. We moved the missiles out of Turkey, but since we almost went to a third world war, literally it was tick, tick, tick. That's how close it was. I spoke to pilots who were flying the Great Circle, who were flying over the Bering Strait with nuclear weapons, ready to attack the Soviet bomber fleet coming over. It was that close. Then when Kennedy wanted to pull us out of the Vietnam War, the CIA was furious because he killed the CIA paramilitary. He is exposing their dealing in drugs in Southeast Asia. And then when he was having these affairs with mistresses, he was under the influence of methamphetamines. He was slipping away from his Secret Service detail and having affairs with women off Central Park in New York, running around the Carlyle Hotel naked. The CIA said, this is ridiculous. They went to LBJ and they said, if something should happen to the president, two things can happen to you. You cannot be on the 1964 ticket and you can go to jail where you're going because of the Bobby Baker scandal in the Senate, or you can go to the White House, collect your $200, and simply put a lid on this. On whatever happens, you just put a lid on it. I'm not going to tell you in advance, and that's exactly what LBJ did. That was the assassination. LBJ went into a war. He was not a wartime president. Hated being in a war. Tried to get out. The only way he got out was to resign. Was to not run for a second term. He said, forget about it. This is insane. Because he knew what he wanted to do in his second term, and he couldn't do it. They would have killed him. So that's why Nixon was able to go to the South Vietnamese embassy and tell the ambassador, hey, don't sign on with Johnson's peace plan, sign on with mine. And he basically, so the book is about that, and about how Marilyn Monroe and Cecil B. DeMille and Charlton Heston and Elvis Presley and all these famous people were all addicted to methamphetamines through this one doctor, and how this doctor, who was also a meth addict, became the poster boy for the war on drugs, lost his medical license.
Wow.
The poster boy for the war on drugs. Literally, the war on drugs started because of him, and it's how a drug like methamphetamines made its way into American culture until now it's routinely given to kids 6, 7 years old who the school says are having attention focus problems.
Wow.
It's methamphetamine is what they're getting, Ritalin and Adderall and meth.
Yeah, well, it's drfeelgoodbook.com, folks. I'm going to read it. I think you should, too. I want to work one quick thing in here, Bill, because we're almost out of time. This is the last question from Steffi in the UK, and she asks, Paul and Ben, what was the weirdest UFO case you ever ran into? Well, we're not UFO investigators as such, but in all our years, we spend a lot of time on cases, and we have a remarkable number of quote-unquote ghost cases that have led us right to UFOs. It's really strange. So I wanted to punctuate that by just giving you a report from one of our we have show reporters in different places who report different things that are going on. And the weirdest case we're working on, probably one of the weirdest of my career in this, is in Central Connecticut, in the area where this terrible Newtown shooting took place and a number of other odd things. And I wanted to get Bill's thoughts on this. This is from our reporter, Donna, out there, and she says, what I wanted to report to you was a sudden and alarming increase in the helicopter traffic in our area. Now, the background of this is that we started with a ghost case. She read my book, Footsteps in the Attic, and said this is the only thing that really explains this, because it gets beyond all the spiritualist stuff we don't really believe in. And it ended up in UFOs. We ourselves saw strange things. People all over the town were getting out of their cars and looking up in the sky. There was strange military activity. And this was part of our pilot we were making that I mentioned to Bill before. And we were never allowed to see this. We've never seen the pilot. Everything is weird about this. So there's more helicopter traffic in the area. Frequent overflights by low-flying military planes in formation. They all head east to west. There are no heliports anywhere in our area, no small airports. Most of the helicopters are not reflective black, and the others are all built the same style, shiny metallic, moving fast and low. The black ones have brackets sticking out on the side, opposite the pilots, with something mounted. There are no markings. Also, the one tall building in town has had dozens of antennas and all sorts of flat, cream-colored things mounted on the roof. we found strange things in the woods near this farm they were using. It is senior housing. Within the last 2 weeks, they probably added over a dozen or more different types. Our city has only one AM radio station and no TV stations. So, Bill, what does this ring a bell anywhere with any of your research? We're finding all kinds of weird things over there.
It kind of does. I mean, what year is this an ongoing?
Yeah, we've been working on this since 2005. By 2009, we were getting UFO reports. People were seeing grays in their houses, and we were identifying.
Can you tell me where in Connecticut this is?
Not over the air. I will tell you privately.
Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, in Connecticut, there is a group, or was a group, called, I believe it was called SCORE. And the group was, I think, founded by Father Malachi Martin.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, yeah.
Okay, so you were the group, okay?
Yeah.
And what they did was they exorcised houses and people, and they were involved in all kinds of weird things. Malachi Martin had that ability. But the understory of Malachi Martin was that he was working for the CIA. That's one of the reasons why he was able to get out of his regular orders as a Jesuit and come to the United States. And, he had a very happy life there. But he was working for the CIA. He wound up in a lot of things dealing with UFOs. He wound up in Egypt and in France and places like that. So there is a connection there between whatever doorway there is to paranormal. I do think that there's more to the idea of parallel universes, parallel worlds, parallel realities than most people give credence to.
Well, you know what we think about that? Certainly in agreement.
Well, and that there are aspects of what people are calling UFOs, because they can't identify them, that emanate from these other realities, and there is traffic back and forth, and I think that is one of the major secrets. That, I mean, if you were the government and you didn't want to freak out a population, to admit there's that right next to you that you can't see it, but they might be able to see you as a parallel world and other parallel worlds, and there's traffic between them.
Bingo.
And better watch out, because what you think is your reality can change on a dime.
Yeah,
the whole
and we've seen it happen.
Exactly. I wouldn't disclose that. Why would you disclose that?
Of course, I've seen people, and this is in the 70s, I saw people while I was doing pastoral work in psychiatric hospitals who I know were experiencing real parallel worlds, and I saw things happen, and so did doctors. That's why I was in there with a Jesuit, as a matter of fact. And so you really hit the nail on the head there, Bill.
Well, I mean, and I think of the story in this hospital. I forget where it is. I want to say Long Island or New England. I'm not sure which hospital. This guy is in the hospital. He's getting an operation, and he is, and I trust the source, and he hears this clattering in the middle of the night. This thing is so loud he can't figure it. He looks up out of bed, and he sees this guy, very pale, translucent, but a palpable individual, right, dragging this cart full of medicines. And he gets up out of bed, he drags his own IV along behind him on wheels, and he follows it to the nurse's station. The guy passes by. The nurses don't even acknowledge this thing, right? He says, "What the hell was that?" And they say, "Oh, that guy. He used to work here as an orderly. He died a few years ago, but he's still making his rounds."
That was Norwich State Hospital. I was there.
Then you know exactly the story.
On that note, Bill, I'm broken-hearted to say it, but we're going to have to stop. We're flat out of time. What a great show. We're going to do this again. But in any case, so stick around for your last lines of your Ben tonight. So I want to thank our producer, the august Steve Bianchi. Next week, June 24th, I'll be co-hosting with, that's going to be Extreme Paranormal is going to be our subject. Larry Lowe, the fellow who wrote in. And we're going to talk about a number of things. Larry, of course, is a Phoenix-based journalist and UFO researcher. And on the, and it's your line. Sorry, go ahead. Well, anyway, here's the deal. So thank you very much for inviting me on the show. I look forward to talking with you again on the show. And here we are on CBS Radio. This is the CBS Radio edition of the show on Sunday, June 23rd in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Windsor, Seattle, Vancouver, and on radio.com. Paul and Ben will remain on the UFO subject with author Mac Maloney. Great
great guest, Mac Maloney, for a discussion of little-known areas around the world that are like Area 51. Mac Maloney, of course, wrote the book on military UFOs.
Okay, folks, we're done. Bill, thanks so much. We'll see you next week, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.